I'll be making my comments in English, which will be appropriate as I will be focusing principally on the appointment and seniority system in the United States and other Anglo-American countries. There's been some discussion of what other countries do and how seniority works elsewhere. The first thing to point out before comparing systems is that the role of the chief judge, the role of the president in Ba'dat is different from the role of chief judges in other comparable Western systems. And the role of Ba'dat in Israeli democracy is different than chief judges than the role of high courts in other Western systems. In the United States Court of Appeals, for example, I clerked for Judge Richard Posner when he was the chief judge of the Seventh Circuit of the Court of Appeals. Nobody even knew, barely, who was the chief judge, because the chief judge had so little power. It was essentially a procedural title. In Israel, the chief judge has powers, the president of the court, has powers that are unknown in other Western courts, in particular, to select panels and to select the size of panels. In almost every other democratic system, the size of a judicial panel is determined strictly by law. In the United States, a panel of a court is 3 judges or the entire court, period. There's only one exception, which is the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which does sit in panels. The number of judges that sit on those panels is strictly determined by law. It is 11 judges, and the identity of those judges is picked randomly by a computer. There is not an ability to have a 9-judge panel or a 15-judge panel. From the first Mishnah in Masechet Sanhedrin, the size of the court that is going to hear a case is not a question for discretion, or if it is an exercise of extraordinary discretion, because the size of a panel that can hear or rehear a matter can be outcome determinative. So the Nashיא of the court in Israel has unusual powers. And of course, and it need not be belabored here, the court itself in Israel has far broader jurisdiction and far greater powers than other courts. In this circumstance, the current system gives far greater power to the existing Judicial Selection Committee, a committee that does not have particular checks on it, than it would already otherwise have. And this requires at least examination. It requires examination. Seniority is not a system of obvious benefits. The United States, certainly not a country which we would like to sit here and say is not a democracy or does not have a well-functioning judicial branch. The Chief Justice does not need to be a member of the court, does not need to be a judge. And we certainly would not say the U.S. Supreme Court is broke. We may even say it's an inspiration. Indeed, members of the Israeli Supreme Court have said it's an inspiration. And Justice Marshall, from whose doctrine of judicial review the Israeli court has borrowed much of its notion of its powers, was himself appointed directly to the court from a position in politics, from a position in government. Given the importance, given the powers of the president of the court and the powers of the court itself, it is natural and reasonable that this subject be subject to law. That is indeed what we hear so much from Ba'dat, that everything must be subject to law. And here's the big difference from countries that have this kind of judicial selection mechanism, that do have a seniority mechanism or don't have a seniority mechanism. Here, there is actually no legally prescribed mechanism. There is no statute creating a mechanism. And given the importance of the issue, having a statute, having a law address the mechanism seems a reasonable subject for discussion. Now, the point has been made, if it's not broke, don't fix it. This is not a light bulb that one can tell whether it's on or off, or a car that either drives or doesn't drive. It's a selection mechanism. It is obviously not broken in the sense that it does not produce a result. It can produce a result. You go through a system, you get an output. But the mere fact that the system produces an output doesn't mean it's not broke, or at least cannot be improved upon. And certainly, it doesn't mean that it should not be subject to law. Now, given that this is the system that is in place, one has an idea of who the future presidents will be. One should not think that because people are involved, and this may relate to particular people, that the subject is beyond discussion. Again, in the United States, there are entire discussions about actual individual people and whether they'll be in the court in the first place, discussions that last weeks and months. Of course, this is all part of a larger question. If judges on the courts are robots, if they're judicial robots, you plug in the Constitution or the idea of reasonableness in one side, and out comes the answer which you know that any properly tuned, any properly oiled judicial robot will give, then it doesn't actually matter. Then it's true. Why have it doesn't matter. You can have a seniority system, you can have this other system. They're all robots. They're all the same. They're all wise, properly functioning robots. Now, this is a view that has fallen out of favor in Western legal academia in the 1920s, this view that judges are robots. And indeed, it is a progressive idea, an idea associated with liberalism, that judges are people too. They have views. This is not bad. This does not make them politicians. Everyone has views. It's impossible to separate people from their views. Legal questions have inherent political components. This isn't bad. This doesn't make the justices bad. Certain legal questions are impossible to separate from politics. Given this, the system for empowering judges and giving some judges more power than the other is a proper and fit subject for legal regulation in a democracy. Okay, תודה רבה.